Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. Resident Evil Infinite Darkness is a computer-generated episodic anime series that follows series mainstays Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield as they uncover a new conspiracy together that's set between the events of Resident Evil 4 and 5. Leon Kennedy is ordered by the President of the United States to partake in a mission that he's about to be debriefed on along with a small group of elite soldiers at the White House when all of a sudden a zombie outbreak occurs at the White House, which results in the President barely escaping with his life and Leon trying to put all the pieces together as he tries to figure out what's going on. His investigation leads him to crossing paths with Claire Redfield, who's conducting humanitarian work with an organization called TerraSave, and together the two of them uncover a massive conspiracy involving bioweapons and various world powers that the two of them have to try and stop together before things get out of control. Anyone who's a fan of the Resident Evil franchise will know exactly what they're getting into as far as the characters are concerned, and it's at this point I gotta say that I love that they brought back the original voice actors for Leon and Claire from the Resident Evil 2 remake in this series. They did an amazing job in that video game in their roles, and it's great to see them back in this series once more. Leon Kennedy is awesome as always. He kinda hogs the limelight away from other characters in this series, and there's not that much development to his own character compared to other games in the franchise, but honestly, I don't really mind that much considering that this is technically a side story that doesn't really have a set place in the timeline other than taking place between RE4 and RE5. And as I said before, his personality is just fantastic. Maybe it was just the voice acting, but his personality was very similar to how it was in Resident Evil 2 Remake, in the sense that he was a goody-goody two-shoes to an obnoxious degree, which I find oddly likable for some reason compared to the sarcastic badass that was in RE4. And don't get me wrong, that version of Leon Kennedy is awesome as well, but for some reason RE2 Remake's version of Leon Kennedy just does it for me. Claire Redfield, on the other hand, doesn't have anywhere near as much screen time compared to Leon in this series, and that was something that kept disappointing me more and more with each subsequent episode in the series. She's only on screen for about 20 or 25 minutes or so total, and most of that is spent in the final episode of the show. It's not that her character is bad per se. Her voice actress does an amazing job just as she did in RE2 Remake before, and her character does do a few important things here and there, but they just don't stack up compared to all the amazing adventures that Leon undergoes in this show. There's a few new characters as well that mixes things up along with Leon and Claire. There's Jason, who was the head of an elite military operation that went wrong in the country of Panamstan, which is central to the key events that happened throughout this anime. Without getting into too much detail about his character arc, I thought that Jason was a decent character overall. He has a lot of great dialogue throughout the series, and his personal motivations, while a bit loony at times, ultimately make sense as you come to learn more about his character with each subsequent episode. Then there's Shen Mei, who's one of the elite team members hired by the President at the beginning of the show, and honestly, I don't really have a whole lot to say about her in this review. She's just kind of there hanging around wherever Jason happens to be at any given moment. There is some backstory with her going on throughout some of the show's events, but it's pretty inconsequential to the overall narrative in my opinion. Most people who are familiar with Resident Evil are familiar with it for one, or I guess two reasons, depending on how you look at it. They're familiar with it because of the zombies, as well as the action and survival horror elements that surround the zombies. However, you may be surprised to learn that this series doesn't feature them all that much compared to the video games in the franchise, and even some of the older CG anime movies in the past. Because this series takes place somewhere between Resident Evil 4 and 5, it's not really restricted to the main timeline, so it has a lot more fun exploring the conspiracy related side of things in Resident Evil and focuses less on the action and horror side of things as opposed to the games and even some of the older movies like I mentioned earlier that were a lot less talk and a lot more action. So that fact might disappoint hardcore Resident Evil fans going into this show, and personally, I found myself being let down a few times in that regard as well. I liked seeing Leon's investigation play out from episode to episode, but at times the show gets really carried away with the whole conspiracy angle of it all, and it just makes you wish for some action to break things up. That's not to say that there's no action at all in this anime. There's still some solid entertainment value to look forward to. My favorite scene is when Leon is trapped in a submarine underwater and he has to navigate a series of hallways while eluding a horde of zombie rats. The parkour and techniques that he uses to escape from and kill the rats with are hilarious, and the puns that he's constantly dropping all over the place are just icing on the cake for me. I noticed, however, that the quality of these action scenes often depended on whether or not they were indoors versus outdoors. If they were indoors, chances are they usually took place in a dark lit area, usually in cramped quarters, and there were a lot of close-up shots featured of people's and characters' faces, so you didn't really have to worry about focusing on the overall quality of the animations that were going on. On the other hand, if an action scene happened to take place outdoors, it was usually in broad daylight and in a much more wide open environment. Even the finale is kind of like this to a certain degree. Even though it takes place indoors, it's still much more well lit and more open compared to the other indoor action scenes. And it's in these well-lit, open spaces that the anime's action starts to dip in quality. And even outside of those action sequences, you can start to see how ugly the anime's CG really can be. Character animations can look stiff, environment textures can look shoddy, and even when the series seems to be operating on all cylinders, there's just this uncanny valley feeling that pops up now and then that just doesn't feel right. The series is 4 episodes in length, each of which running about 25 minutes or so in length, so it's easily approachable and digestible for newcomer, casual, and hardcore fans of Resident Evil that may not necessarily want to binge watch the whole show in one go. However, even with taking that into consideration, I find it hard to believe that everyone will be able to make sense of everything that happens in this show, even having prior knowledge of what happens in the games. And not to get too political in this video, because I know that tends to stir up angry comments below, but I found that the series tended to really lean towards promoting China in a positive light and making them look flawless in every sense of the word. It starts off subtle in the beginning and you don't really notice it at first, but as it goes from episode to episode, you start to wonder and go, okay, what exactly are you telling us here? Beyond this, it just doesn't feel all that different from all the other CG animes released in the past. It does add some unique lore to the series, and it does have a few cute references to Resident Evils 2 and 4, which are some of my favorite games in the whole series, but outside of that, that's it. If you've seen one of the animes, you've pretty much seen them all. Overall, Resident Evil Infinite Darkness is a decent watch, but nothing special. It's great to see Leon and Claire back together again for the short time that they are together, but the story that's told between the two in this case is a bit underwhelming. I don't recommend anyone unfamiliar with Resident Evil to watch this show. Even the ones who claim they're familiar through the crappy live-action movies with Mila Jovovich are going to be totally lost as to what's going on in the series. However, if you're a hardcore or at least a casual fan of the series like myself, you'll probably find something to enjoy when watching the series. It does have an interesting story-focused aspect to it, and it does have some solid entertainment here and there, but in the end, it feels like the same Resident Evil anime as always, and doesn't do anything to elevate the franchise as a whole. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review part 2 of R.L. Stine's horror movie trilogy, Fear Street 1978. Bye bye!